I'm Walt Thiessen, the Crypto Skeptic. Let's talk crypto. And my special guest today is Josh Rhodes, who has one of the coolest website names I've heard in a while, a domain name called cryptolyall.co. I mean, that's a great name. First of all, it makes it very clear where you're from. But where'd you get the idea to do that? That was cool.
Oh, well, I'm born and raised in Alabama. I guess you could say I'm a country boy. First in my line to go to college, and just grew up in the environment of Southern hospitality and family values. Mm-hmm. When I first got into crypto, like many do, you quickly realize that, it's the Wild West.
Yes.
There can be some, there's some, just like any market, just like any marketplace, there's a snake oil salesman or two around the corner. And so,
or two, yeah.
I'm trying Crypto Y'all, the brand is all about trying to like merge hospitality, integrity, core values with the greatest financial technology in history, which is obviously crypto. And so that's the idea behind it.
And you're obviously an enthusiast. Have you been enthusiastic about it since Bitcoin first came out, or did you pick it up along the way? Or
no, I mean, I wish I had this romantic story with crypto and blockchain and everything, but in 2017, I've been a business owner and a real estate investor, and in 2017, I saw a FOMO headline. Just like everybody else does, about how much money someone made. And it caught my attention. But once I got into it, I realized that I had a language for this. Like I had understanding for assets that are accretive and have utility. And so cash flow, all the wealth building factors and properties that crypto has. And I quickly became, like you said, an enthusiast.
Very clearly so as well with what you talk about on your website. I actually was perusing the pages a little bit just to see what you talk about. And if there is a stronger advocate for crypto out there, I haven't met him yet. Give me time. I might meet him, but I haven't met him yet. Which is appropriate. I mean, as you know, I'm the crypto skeptic. That's the way I name myself. And I was actually aware of Bitcoin when it first came out. I knew the theory. I was a philosophical libertarian, so that's why I knew all about it. That came from libertarian circles. And but I also refused to. I probably should have minded anyway, just because I didn't think it was worth anything. I didn't care about it, but I probably should have done it anyway. I'd be worth millions right now if I'd done that. But that's all right. Live and learn.
I love it.
But I also have, to this day, many, many concerns about it. And so that becomes the topic that we're going to be addressing today. So I'm going to let you go first on this, talk about why you love cryptocurrency so much and why you think it's such a great investment and so forth. And then I'll counter, and then we'll just kind of dive in, see how deep we can go. Good.
Well, like I said, I was a business owner and a real estate investor before I was a crypto investor. And I read this crazy book by this crazy guy named Robert Kiyosaki years ago.
Rich Dad, Poor Dad?
Poor Dad. Yep.
Yeah.
And I started learning about his cash flow quadrants. And it was that alternative. I mean, speaking, as a philosophical libertarian, it's an alternative philosophy of personal finance that you don't learn in public schools and wealth building. And it really opened my eyes. I remember in college reading Plato's Apology, the allegory of the cave, and how the people were shackled to the back of the cave. And the only thing they knew were the shadows coming from the silhouettes coming from the fire that was above. It was very allegorical and weird if you just read it. But if you look into it, it's like, wow, man, we are raised in this system, this matrix, if you will, of believe one way, create the cogs in the wheel, create the factory workers, if you will, but don't allow the lower caste system to emerge into the upper caste system. When I read Kiyosaki, it really unshackled me from the back of the cave, and I was able to walk out and see the sunlight.
Very nice.
That rubric, that framework that I acquired from someone else's wisdom, not from my own, travels with me now. So when I started online businesses for the first time, when I started drop shipping bicycles from a warehouse on the West Coast and learning Facebook advertising and SEO and email marketing, and learning what an LLC really does, and S corporations, and getting an accountant and having a team, and like all this stuff, it's like they just did not teach me this in public schools.
No.
And so when I finally got my hands on crypto, specifically Bitcoin and Ethereum, just like most people adopt those two top biggest market cap coins first, I was just able to synthesize the characteristics and properties of those assets the same way I was able to, look at a rental property that has a tenant that's paying me cash flow every month, or my business that's paying me cash flow every month, et cetera. I was able to see it as an asset class. I view it objectively. I don't view it necessarily as some people do. Like, I don't know if you'd call me a Bitcoin maximalist, although I believe it's the apex property. I would consider myself a crypto enthusiast, someone who invests in things that have market value, but I don't know if I would necessarily like describe my persona and my identity with crypto like some do on the internet. You know what I mean?
Right.
I'm very much kind of like Mr. Wonderful on the Shark Tank. Like, if it's a good deal, like I think he and I would get along just fine. If there's money, if there's margins, if there's accretive properties, I'm in.
Okay, fair enough. Well, I'll give you a little bit on my background. Like I said, I was philosophically libertarian back when Bitcoin came out in 2008. And it was probably not the best time for me to be looking at something like Bitcoin, just because 2008 also destroyed my business and my wife's business. So we were like, struggling to survive,
Sure.
which was not a happy time. But there is a piece of me that kind of wishes I'd done some mining then, because mining was easy. The problems you had to solve were pretty easy at that point. So it would have been nice to have some. But the concerns that I had then have pretty much played out. And I really have a lot of doubts about whether or not Bitcoin can ever become a globally accepted currency. By globally accepted, I mean by accepted by the masses.
Yeah.
I mean, you can argue that it's globally accepted because it's in all countries now, but it's not really quite the same thing. Not really.
Sure. Adoption is different. Yeah.
Yeah, it really is. It really is. And I guess if I were to list my top concerns, I'll go to the number one concern. I learned from a guest that I had on last week that my initial estimate of 5,000 cryptocurrencies is wrong. It's now over 11,000. It's like, okay, well, very interesting. I know there are literally over $1 trillion invested in cryptos, and I don't know what your best guesstimate is. I estimate that if any cryptocurrencies ever gain global acceptance, it's going to be one or two, maybe three. It's not going to be 11,000, which means there are 10,997 invested cryptocurrencies that are going to go flat. And the first thought that goes to my mind is, what does that do for popular acceptance of cryptocurrency when all these investors lose their shirts?
I love that. And a couple of data points I would throw back in your court, and one reference piece. I think there's more like 18,000 crypto protocols.
Okay, well, we just had a bid up there, so there we go. We're up to 18,000. Yeah. Do I hear 19,000?
Every podcast you do, we'll just go up a couple thousand.
All right, okay, that's fair.
But in that, so there's truth and there's sobriety in your position, I think. But at the same time, not absolute truth. And I'll say what I mean by that. There is absolutely inflation, and I don't mean monetary inflation. I mean inflation of projects and outcomes, and there's definitely bubbles within bubbles within bubbles when you're on the front end of a burgeoning industry like we see happening right now with crypto. I mean, if you go back to the .com boom, I can't remember the exact number, or even if you go back to the automobile boom, there were over 490 car companies when like Henry Ford was in his heyday. Mm-hmm. And basically there were 3 that emerged from that movement. And then if you fast forward to the .com bubble, same kind of ratios, you've got a very small class of survivors and a lot of, bodies on the beach, if you will, in terms of the alternative projects that just couldn't get market share. Um, when it comes to Bitcoin specifically, it's first to market. It's going to be really hard for anyone to usurp Bitcoin as the incumbent. However, there's a lot of conjecture in the marketplace right now by Ethereum maximalists who think that Ethereum can decouple and eclipse Bitcoin's market share even in the next 12 months because of some innovations that their network is undergoing. But regardless, the total right now, even in a contracted market, I think we're at a $1.5 trillion total crypto market cap. Bitcoin touched $1 trillion last November as its own market cap, although it's contracted over the last 5 or 6 months along with the rest of the market. I think the market's been indicating that we've been in a recession, just like markets do, and economies, finally wake up and realize they're in a recession after the market's been telling them. But gold has a $10 trillion market cap itself, and it's been around for thousands of years, obviously. So it's an interesting debate to have that if you look at the adoption curve, which big money institution analysts like Fidelity Investments, they have like $10 trillion of assets under management, BlackRock, Grayscale. They have analysts talking about, and I can't remember the analyst's name currently, but I have a screenshot of his graph showing the adoption curve of crypto compared with mobile phone technology and the internet. And they're basically in lockstep with each other. I think you could argue at times, obviously, crypto is accelerating its adoption curve in comparison to the other two technologies. But it's not out of the question, looking at the last 13 years, looking at the math of the adoption curve, or the hockey stick opportunity that there is ahead of us, that it's not impossible for Bitcoin, just Bitcoin, to have a $10 trillion market cap in the neighborhood of the year 2030. Now, that's assuming, to your point, that adoption continues at its current pace. And Fidelity, like I mentioned, they put out this really incredible paper in February called Bitcoin First. And they're using words like, Bitcoin is a superior form of money. But I think that's a little deceptive, if I'm being devil's advocate, because money by the masses is a very generic term. I think you really have to understand currency, fiat, store of value, like savings versus hard currency, or hard money versus soft money, and there's a lot of history there. And I think you're right. I don't know if Bitcoin's here. I don't know if it's the innovation to replace, the fiat dollar, for example. But it very much could be the biggest competitor that gold or any other commodity has ever had on the planet. So
it's an interesting viewpoint. I would point out, and I guess I have to preface this by saying I no longer consider myself to be a libertarian. Philosophically, I'm not like out of alignment with them, except I really don't care about government anymore. So I don't really care about all the stuff that libertarians care about. And so I don't really fit in the camp. But with that little caveat in there, I have to point out gold is not a currency. Silver is not a currency.
Sure.
These various commodities are not currencies. So it might perhaps achieve that level of acceptance, but that doesn't make it a currency. And
Sure.
that's really the question are any of these going to become currencies? You also mentioned a couple other things I want to kind of touch on very briefly. You mentioned hard money, soft money, fiat money. A lot of listeners might not even know what that is. I imagine those who are listening who already know crypto are aware of all that stuff. I'm going to just do some very broad brush definitions, just without getting into the philosophy of it. Generically speaking, any money that's issued through central banks like the euro, the dollar, and so forth, fiat currency. And why are they fiat? Because they're issued by the authority of a government. So we'll just leave it at that. Hard money versus soft money. Hard money is generally considered to be things like gold, silver, because it is physical. It's got weight, it's got heft. It's actually something that's in a very limited supply, but compared to the kinds of things you can do with so-called fiat money. So what makes it hard versus soft is that hard money, it's harder to fake it. It's harder to inflate it. It's harder to do all the things that libertarians in particular don't like. That's why they like the whole idea of crypto, or some of them like the idea of crypto so much. So, with those two ideas in mind, I want to point to the 2008 financial crisis that I
Mm.
mentioned a moment ago. And I'll be honest with you, I think my former fellow libertarians missed the boat. And the reason I say that is 2008 was supposed to be the watershed. That
Mm.
was supposed to be the moment when all of a sudden the fiat dollar collapses and the fiat euro collapses and the
Mm.
whole currency system falls apart. And indeed, the central banks got together and said, we're going to basically prop up the system and we're going to
Yeah.
throw a bunch of money into it. And what was supposed to happen, according to Austrian economic theory and libertarian theory, was it was supposed to lead to tremendous punishment of the Fed and of the central banks of Europe and other banks around the world. And the markets did exactly the opposite.
Yeah.
They rewarded them. They applauded. They say, "Yay, we're so glad you did that." And then they took us on the biggest bull market run we've had in the last probably 100 years, which basically destroys the Austrian theory. It destroys the libertarian theory. It destroys the theory that says that one of the primary concerns of money is the store of value, the basically retaining purchasing power. And
Mm.
apparently the markets don't give a crap about that.
Yeah.
So there's a big lesson to be learned here. Like, okay, guys, if the history is telling us the direct opposite, shouldn't we abandon the theories that even led to the creation of crypto?
Well, I think that is a fantastic sample size, if you will, or extraction from our recent timeline history. I remember in 2008 when Bear Stearns was announcing that they were going under. It was on CNBC. I was putting a for sale sign in a real estate flip deal.
Oh wow! Oh my god!
Literally in the yard. I was putting the for sale sign in the yard, and I remember going, "Gosh, I was in the middle of just a lot of moving parts in my financial journey, and yeah, I think you're right. I think on some level you make a good point. On the other level, I would say it's a short time period to be drawing a firm absolute conclusion around whether or not Austrian economic theory is played out to be accurate or not, because you could also argue that as you and I sit here today, we are feeling the effects of a lot of those decisions from 2008, or even in the last 2 years, where 40% of the US dollar supply in history has been printed. And so it's created a massive amount of inflation. At the same time, though, you can look at the strength of the dollar again at this very moment. It could change and roll over, but the US dollar index right now is as strong, one of the top three highest points of strength in history. And the way that DXY is obviously measured is basically how strong is it compared to other fiat currencies.
Yeah.
Well, it's because the entire planet is in we are the cinder block tied to their ankle.
No kidding. Absolutely.
And so our recession is their recession. So it's going to be interesting, Walt. I think you nor I are at a place to draw conclusions, for example, on too big to fail. I would agree.
We learned about that one too, didn't we?
Right. Like the governments, as long as we allow governments to do this, it's actually it's funny how how two people can look at an apple and see different sides or shades of red.
Sure.
Your example that you bring up is an illustration that I would bring up, obviously, for an alternative viewpoint,
Sure.
which is, economic cycles, markets and economies are different things. The markets, of course, loved it because it's liquidity, basically, where it's, we could just say that the government has basically been paying the aristocracy of the markets, literally loaning them free money, literally for a decade almost. Obviously, the reserve rate has gone up and down, but I'm generalizing.
Mm-hmm.
And the markets make money off of that liquidity. Who it hurts and who has not just gone up and to the right are everyone else, the populace, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, if it were so, then we wouldn't be worried. If we had a strong enough fiat standard, then it wouldn't bother us when Russia invades Ukraine, the first and the 10th largest wheat exporters on the planet, or it wouldn't bother us if the Federal Reserve, raised rates or lowered rates. We would just, we'd all be happy and rich and wealthy. And if you look back, and I think there's a really strong argument. I was listening to someone you may or may not adore very much. Are you familiar with Safidian Amos?
I know his name. I don't know him very well.
Well, he's a Bitcoiner. He's an Austrian economist. He wrote the Bitcoin standard, and he also wrote the fiat standard. And he's pretty famous at being pretty incendiary with his remarks, as most front people are. As most spokespeople are for movements. And he talks about, though, and I can't, I don't have the data to back up this statement, but he talks about how fiat dollars basically pay for wars. If you look back over history, and wars sustain so that fiat dollars are needed. And it's a pretty strong indictment, not just on the United States, but on most empires.
Oh, totally agree. I totally agree. Yeah.
So anyway, absolutely. I'm rambling, but
yeah, I think what you're saying is true. The real question, though, is that sufficient information distributed among the populace to get them to move? And I think the answer is pretty clear. I was a libertarian since the party was first started. That was 50 years ago. Guess what? They haven't gained any ground in 50 years. The best they got was like, what, 3%? Like, oh, okay, yeah, right. So
where have you traveled to philosophically? Where are you?
I have no political orientation at all.
Okay.
No. Yeah. I've come to the conclusion, I think rightfully so, that politics is a negative-sum game, and there's no point in playing it.
So, okay, wait. So have you entertained the thought of anarchy?
Yeah.
Or anarchism?
Yeah. But that's also a political position.
Right. It totally very.
Yeah. My position is non-political.
It's not an agnostic position by any stretch.
It's not agnostic. It's like, I don't care. Like, go away. Take your problem with me. Because the way I look at it is, anytime that I look at any aspect of it, anytime I take any position in it, I lose. It reminds me of the movie that came out in the 1990s, one of Matthew Broderick's first early movies, called War Games.
Yes.
Remember that one? The computer is, generating all these scenarios for generating nuclear war and about to launch the missiles. And Matthew Broderick's character gets him to start playing tic-tac-toe to prove to himself he can't win the game. And the computer comes to the conclusion that this is a strange game. The only way to win is not to play.
That's a really good illustration.
So that's my viewpoint about politics. The only way to win is not to play.
Fascinating. Yeah. Do you consider politics and government one and the same?
No, not one and the same. My major was actually government and politics, so no, not one and the same.
Yeah.
But they are certainly inextricably linked.
Right. Yeah. Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love I don't subscribe to it, but I have become fondly fascinated with anarchism and the true definition of what it means to believe in that. And with recent years' events, it's been very interesting to see guys like Michael Malice and Safidian Amos, people pop up going, yeah, I'm an anarchist. And because in my head, I've always thought, well, anarchy is like the purge, like, let's just kill everybody to kill everybody, which is not anarchy in their political perspective. But I just find it to be fascinating because a lot of those people, it's all about intrinsic circles. So there's a lot of libertarians who agree, or anarchists who believe with a lot of things that libertarians believe. They're just on the different, they're further over on
different ways of explaining it and discussing it. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
The way I like to think of it is this: if you kind of look at the arguments that get made and propositions that get put forward, what they all amount to is this: let's push against what we don't like.
Right.
We don't like government. We don't like fiat money. We don't like, list a whole bunch of things. And one of the things that I learned, it took me a while to learn it. It took me a long while after 2008 actually to learn it. But one of the things I finally learned is the more you push against something, the more you get of it. And it gets bigger and bigger and bigger.
Yeah.
And which is kind of ironic. You would think that I would think that libertarians would have learned this. I would have thought that I would have learned this long ago, because what are the things that libertarians push against? They're saying, well, the war on drugs has failed, the war on poverty has failed, the war on terror has failed. They keep listing all these things that have failed, and that's their argument against government. And I keep saying to myself, well, so why are we pushing against them? Mm-hmm. Why are we pushing against the wars themselves? Why are we pushing against any of it? Every time that we try to do this, it fails. At some point, we have to say to ourselves, why don't we just stop?
Yeah, well, if you read, I sound like a know-it-all. None of this.
Well, so do I. So we're even.
But like Ray Dalio, he has this new book or work that he's been producing and is recently published. And now, of course, the title is failing me, but you can easily get it on Audible, or it's basically talking about how the cycles of empires rise and fall. Mm. And to your point, I think libertarians have not become a majority voice simply because either they're not as good at marketing and communication as they should be, or as their Democrats and Republicans or conservatives and liberals are traditionally. And so they haven't been able to permeate pop culture as much. Or the fact of the matter is, empires rise the same way you read Lord of the Rings, and anybody who gets their hands on the Ring of Power, we'd love for them to do the noble and correct thing and throw it into the volcano fires of Mordor, but Unfortunately they don't. They hang on to it because power is absolute. Power corrupts absolutely, as a forefather, I believe, said. So it's an interesting thing. It's going to be curious over the next century, I guess, as the American empire sunsets and whatever takes place or foothold afterwards, what philosophies or rules of government will actually emerge. I think there's probably
I'll tell you what, though. I think there's actually a different reason why libertarian philosophy has failed.
Oh, I'm all ears.
In terms of gaining traction among the population.
Yeah.
And it's really, marketing kind of touches on it, and some of the other things you mentioned touch on it, but really, I think this is the core of it. Libertarians aren't sure what they're in favor of. They're totally sure what they're against, but they have a very hard time articulating what they're in favor of. Mm. The most that you'll ever get is, well, I'm in favor of freedom, which is great. There's nothing wrong with being in favor of freedom. Don't get me wrong. But it doesn't exactly light the populace on fire.
Right. Yeah. Or limited government. Right.
Yeah. So but that's an against. That's not a favor.
Yeah. Agreed.
Basically they can't articulate what they're in favor of without resorting to a negative.
Mm.
And there's no way you can. I don't care what you're selling. You can't sell based on that. Because basically what you're trying to sell is, you're trying to sell based on anger as your emotional anchor. And anger is a tough sell. It's not impossible, but it's a tough sell.
It's true. I agree, but anger's powerful. It's potent. It's very tangible in environments. Just take pandemic, for example. Mm-hmm. There was a lot of anger over vaccines, masks, you name it. So much so that it would activate people who are apolitical or non-political in the past to protest or vote for somebody else. So I think there's an argument to be made that anger can be a political currency.
Oh, I'm not saying that it isn't. Actually, I would argue that it almost always is. That in fact, that's what all
creates revolution, right? Yeah.
Among other things, yeah. The challenge with anger is turning it into, to use the modern term, a sustainable thing.
Yeah.
Because anger itself, you can't, well, not just constructive, it's hard to sustain anger. There are we could point to a few people that we know of who routinely are always pushing the anger buttons.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, it's still hard to sustain.
Sure.
And after a while, the pandemic, I think, is a great example. People, not so much anger, fear was the button pushed with the pandemic over and over and over again by people on all political sides. All political angles were pushing fear buttons. And when you keep pushing fear buttons over and over again, a funny thing happens. People get tired of it.
Yeah.
There's actually, right now, there's actually an increase in COVID and nobody's caring anymore.
Right. And it's
because they're just fatigued by it. They're just like, I'm so tired of this. I can't put up with this anymore. Forget it. I'm done.
Totally agree.
So how do you turn that into a marketing strategy? Well, the only way to do that is to keep hammering them. Yeah, but we got all this terrible disease. It kills itself. It's a marketing strategy that ultimately has to fail.
Yeah, totally agree. And so back to Bitcoin being a currency, I think I agree with you. I think it ultimately is not meant, well, whether it's meant to be something and whether it emerges as a particular utility
Good
is
point.
different, right?
Yeah.
So I think what it's going to end up being is more of a savings account than a checking account for people. And
Okay.
I think the jury's still out on what actually replaces a fiat currency, right? So like there's a
I'm not
lot.
even sure the jury's been sent into the jury room yet, to be perfectly honest. I haven't found a clear indictment.
Well, I, ironically, there's a massive lawsuit, between the SEC and a company called Ripple or XRP. And XRP would effectively have the technology to replace the traditional banking SWIFT system. This is just an illustration. I'm not pumping XRP. I am an XRP holder. Make your own decisions financially.
Full disclosure made.
Full disclosure. But it's an interesting debate because you start looking at the technology and the capabilities of XRP being able to handle millions and millions of transactions per second. As a payment system, almost as like a better version of Venmo or PayPal, where you could have B2C or B2B interactions. But for, as big government loves to do, have double standards. SEC files a lawsuit against XRP, but gives a dispensation to Ethereum several years ago. Ethereum is famous for being called programmable money. You've got XRP, which is basically not the same, and I don't even want to get into the technicals, but a better version of the traditional banking SWIFT system where, instead of waiting for 2 days for a wire to clear across continental lines, it's instant and it can work at scale. Whereas people don't realize how rudimentary our banking system is globally still. And so,
Yes.
there's breakthrough technologies that I think are being held back by, you can call it conspiracy theory, whatever, governmental forces. XRP is just one example, or being held back by invisible market forces, for that matter. Where like the jury's out. Like we are nowhere near Bitcoin replacing U.S. dollars.
Nope.
My projection is, especially after some stable coin faux pas that have happened in the marketplace in the recent days, what's going to happen is governments like the U.S., maybe Russia, definitely China, they're just going to do the central bank digital currency thing.
That's quite possible.
Extremely dangerous socially for all of us citizens. And they're going to try to put out of business all the stable coins like USDC, USDT, BUSD, DAI, all these different stable coins that are pegged to the US dollar value. And they're just going to be like, no, there's $1. There's a $1 version of a crypto, and it's our US, central bank digital currency. You can still have Bitcoin. That's cool. But in terms of like, can you pay for the laundromat with your Bitcoin? You're probably going to be incentivized by the local and national governments to use the central bank digital currency. And then Bitcoin will simply be an asset or a security like, you see elsewhere already in different asset classes. That's my personal.
I think it's fair. That's a fair evaluation. I'm not saying it's going to happen exactly that way, but that's a fair model I think you've laid out. And I think I would tack on one other thing, and that is the thing that will make that work. It isn't so much the incentivization, although that certainly will play a role.
Yeah,
it's going to be the dollar. Because the dollar or the euro, they are, if you want to talk in terms of commodities, they are the brands.
Yeah.
There are no other brands on the face of the planet as strong as dollar and euro. Not even the others that we know about are that strong. They are they are the Bitcoin and Ethereum of fiat money. They are. And they're likely to be that for generations to come, just because of the way the system is structured. So as long as that's the case, then all they really have to do is just, unless a usurper manages to come along and develop a brand that all of a sudden people start trusting, and I don't see that happening, it's going to be them.
Yeah, the real battle, though, to me, is not utility. Like, it's not the capability of the crypto, whatever it ends up being, Bitcoin or Ripple or something else. The utility and the functionality will be there. I mean, we've developed iPhones that talk back to you since I was born. Like, we'll create cryptocurrency to where we can interact. The functionality is already here. The real battle line is what is the world reserve currency? That's the thing that we have to figure out.
Well, I think we already know the answer to that.
Well, we do currently, obviously,
Yeah.
ever since what is it, Bretton Woods Accords after World
Right.
War II, but
Right.
it's being challenged. I mean, the dollar's currency status, reserve status, is being challenged daily, and you know, Russia has moved to the gold standard. They have now stabilized the value of the ruble.
As far as we know.
Yeah, China's doing their own thing. There won't be three reserve currencies. There can't be. Money wants to be one, right? Globally. So something's going to have to give. Either the dollar's going to have to give up its crown, or there's going to be war, or everyone agrees to move to an apolitical, decentralized world reserve currency.
I think you're leaving out a fourth possibility,
which is
status quo. I don't think status quo is a given to be gone. I think status quo is actually the odds favorite to continue.
Oh, you mean just the way it currently is?
The way it is right now, yeah. I don't see any reason to believe that it's going to change.
Yeah.
And reserve currency, I mean, I don't want to get too much into monetary theory, but reserve currency is literally the main reason why I think that's true. I don't see that budging. I don't see anything changing that.
That's a good point, because you could look back since 43 and go, okay, the dollar's value just obviously keeps going down and to the right. I guess functionally it could keep doing that by
design, by the way.
Sure. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. And there's a whole theory that's associated with that, but that's really outside the scope of what we're talking about here. Let's go back to the topic of Bitcoin. I want to go back to the topic of adoption, because I really do believe that is the so-called elephant in the room. We love that phrase these days, right? The elephant in the room. Well, that is the elephant in the room. If it doesn't get adopted, it doesn't become a currency. It's that straightforward. So I want to ask you point blank, what do you think the odds are that a non-dollar, non-euro, non-government cryptocurrency gains widespread adoption?
What are the odds that happens?
Yeah.
Very high. I just have no idea.
High against or high in favor? In
favor. Yeah.
You think it's likely?
Yeah, I'm a proponent, obviously. I'm an enthusiast.
Based on what, though? That's the part I'm curious about.
The trend from the last 13 years.
In what sense?
Just the adoption trend.
The adoption trend has been pretty minimal. I mean, there isn't a whole lot of adoption in terms of, yes, I'm using it as my daily currency.
Yes, from a spot check popular culture, but in the way you and I interact. But if you look at the actual numbers and how many people are actually opening crypto wallets, buying Bitcoin, etc., it's as fast as, like I was saying, mobile phone adoption or internet adoption.
I would argue that's a speculative bubble. That's just a bunch of speculators trying to get in on a good thing monetarily. They don't necessarily want to use it as a currency. They're just saying, oh, hey, here's a great way to make some money.
Sure, it's possible, but those people, those pioneers, are the people who create the adoption regardless of their intentions.
No, I don't agree with that.
And the popularization of it as an asset.
No, I don't agree with that either. And part of the reason I don't agree with that is what we were talking about at the top of the show. 10,000, how many? 18,000? What's the latest count? I don't remember what the count is. Is it 18,000? Sure. 18,000 currencies? 17,997 of them go belly up. There's no way that does not have a horribly negative effect on anyone who's even considering adopting cryptocurrency as a daily commodity to be traded as a currency. There's just no way that factor alone doesn't wipe it all out. And it's all, let's be honest, all that is involved really in whether or not a currency is a currency is public belief in it. That is really the bottom line.
I would disagree though with that. Citing the same illustrations I used earlier about the .com bubble and the automobile movement.
I don't think they're actually good. I don't think they're good analogies. automobile movement, well, that was basically a bunch of guys in their garages. They were the only ones taking the risks. .com, yeah, there were a number of people who took risks there who got burned, but it was pretty clear to everyone concerned that they were investing in the internet and that the internet was going to be a success, and it was a success. And I don't think that the .com bubble really applies to a marketplace for currencies, because what we were talking about there is what different kinds of ideas can we create about how do we move this whole idea of an internet forward. And a lot of the ideas that they came up with were bad ideas, and so that makes sense to most people that bad ideas are going to fall by the wayside. But a currency is a different deal. People have very different feelings about money than they do from anything else that's in their lives. I don't care what it is we're talking about. It is an entirely different animal to itself.
Well, and I would say you're conflating a couple of things too, like
Okay.
currency and blockchain technology. Those are two different things,
I
because
agree.
not all cryptocurrencies, those 18,000 are trying to be Bitcoin or Ethereum. There are also other services and utilities popping up that are, Mark Cuban said it the other day. He was like, yeah, the cryptos that actually save time, save money, or increase profits for a real world business, those are cryptos that will have a future, and everything else will not. And I think that's a really simplistic way to look at it. For example,
Well, I agree. I want to just lay out. I certainly agree that the non-currency applications of crypto are
yeah,
exciting. I don't want to suggest that I don't think that's true. I really do think that there
sure,
could be some really interesting adoption in that field. The question I'm raising is the adoption of currency as currency. And there's
yeah,
actually there's talk about gray area. There is a gray area here in that we tend to describe certain things, certain software creations as cryptocurrencies, but like you say, we're not actually
yeah,
going to treat them as currencies.
no
So why
way,
are we calling them currencies? And now we're just kind
yeah.
of like
It's just
blurring all
that,
the boundaries there.
right? And even Bitcoin, I don't think, it's a peer to peer network. It's the largest computer network on the planet. And before I even start thinking about it as a currency, I have to think about it as a peer to peer information exchange. But you think about the other cryptocurrencies, again, bad labeling.
Yeah.
It's basically lazy categorization, because it's honestly a bunch of software companies that
Right.
are using decentralized blockchain open ledger technology, as
Hmm.
opposed to centralized, Windows 97
Right.
type approach. But, you
Interesting
know,
choice, Windows 97. I noticed that one. I just wanted to say.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So, that's a centralized platform. Applications locked. It's not open. It's, so my point is that, um, I don't also believe that retail adoption is necessarily going to be what kicks the can up the hill in terms of creating a new reserve currency. I think what we're going to have to see, and what the difference is in crypto as a movement as opposed to most other movements, is that retail money was led institutional money. And I think the only way that Bitcoin or any other crypto becomes the replacement of fiat dollars or native currencies to sovereign governments is if institutional dollars lead that charge, or if sovereign states, like tomorrow, as you and I are talking here, I think there's like 43 nations meeting in El Salvador together,
Hmm.
all emerging industry, all emerging economies, mind you. Not this isn't G7, G8 stuff. This is Latin American, African, Southern Asian countries meeting together in El Salvador to discuss basically what El Salvador has done, which is make Bitcoin legal tender in their country.
Right.
Now, again, time will tell us on how successful these countries will be, and how much adoption that kind of institutional, top down influence will have.
Yeah, it's hard to tell exactly how that plays out, and it's hard to tell exactly how the one country that has adopted it is going to do with it as a currency, considering especially how much its value keeps bouncing all over the place. That makes it. That's one of the tough things is if your currency is bouncing all over the place, your economy doesn't tend to do well. Now, in this
Yeah,
case,
well,
it's also a case of the currency balancing more towards strength at times, so that could possibly have some sort of beneficial consequences for the country, but for Ecuador anyway. But we'll have to kind of wait to see. Now, there's a case where the jury really is out. We don't really know what's going to happen in a country where they're dealing with a currency. They're like, oh, it's up here. No, it's down here. It's over here. Whoa, whoa. How much is the dang thing worth today? I don't know.
It's all about market, but to your point, it's all about market cap, because volatility shrinkens as market cap grows, right? Market cap is a representation of adoption, basically. And so
well, it's also more than that, because there's a practical day-to-day living thing that goes on here. The people who are living within the Ecuadorian economy right now are dealing with all these bounces all over the place, and it's affecting them. So so to me, the question is, how do they respond to that? How do they react to it? Do they say, yes, we want to continue with this, or do they say, give us $1 back, or give us €1, or give us something else? I can't do this anymore.
Sure. Yeah. It'll be interesting to see. Time will tell. I think they did this for the first time, like, don't quote me, later half of 2020, maybe early 21.
Yeah.
But I'm pretty sure they have a full year of at least under their belt. And I think their GDP was up 8%, maybe 6%. So it's going to be interesting to see. I mean, again, I don't like to draw conclusions on a national level a year in.
Yeah, me neither. Because just because it's up 6 to 8% nationally doesn't mean that half the country wasn't clobbered by it. It just means that the largest institutions did well. Like, okay, well, good for them, but meanwhile, people.
And I also don't think it's an I don't think it's an all or nothing thing. I think they still have secondary currencies, and I don't know how it functionally pans out. Central Republic of Africa has also done it, and then Panama has legislation on their floor to possibly adopt it as native or legal tender.
But again, it comes down to, how does it actually play out? What's their experience with it? Because if their experience is good, okay, now you got perhaps something going. If their experience is not so good, you see a whole bunch of people shying away from it.
Sure, 100%.
Yeah. Well, I have to say, this has been fascinating and fun, and I'm loving it. And we could probably go on for another couple hours, but I think we should probably start to wrap the whole thing up here. Before we go, got to tell people a little bit more about how to reach out to you, especially if they don't think that Walt makes any sense and that the advocate over here is the guy to follow. So how do they follow you?
Oh, it's easy. I'm a Southern guy, as we discussed, so you can go to cryptoyall.co. And I've got a case study or a training or something you can opt into there. Jump onto my email list, and I'll teach you everything that Walt is skeptical about.
There you go. Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Josh Rhodes, hey, this has been great, guy. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this.
Thank you.
This has been a lot of fun, and I'm sure I've learned things. I bet you've learned things. I'm hopeful our audience has learned things, so I think it's been worthwhile all the way around. So
thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all of our listeners everywhere. And by the way, we do have a podcast that I do too called LOA Today. Check it out. We'll see you all next time here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody.